a major case had just occurred in the city. While a passenger was sitting on a bus, because the driver braked suddenly, the cloth bag in his hand carelessly flew out, and the object inside the bag subsequently rolled and fell onto the floor. Everyone in the vehicle regained their composure and looked over, discovering to their horror that the item rolling out was a human head, dripping with blood. Instantly, utter chaos erupted inside the bus. The driver opened the doors and the people fled in droves, but the driver himself was taken hostage and restrained by that male passenger. Now, the vehicle had rushed out of the urban area and was speeding recklessly toward the deep mountains. Thank you for choosing Whispering with Pineapple, a place where you can relax while listening to stories, practice your English listening skills, and check translations through both Vietnamese and English versions. If there are any errors during the translation process, we welcome your feedback. To motivate us to create more videos in the future, we hope you will give us a like and subscribe to receive notifications for our new releases. Wishing you all a wonderful time listening to the story and relaxing moments with Pineapple. After the incident occurred, our sub-bureau immediately reacted and deployed 2 lines of work. The first task was to immediately determine the movement direction of the hijacked vehicle through traffic surveillance devices on the surrounding roads. Just a few minutes after the bus was hijacked, a police patrol car pursued and attempted to intercept it, but just as they passed through a railway intersection, the bus smashed through the barrier and rushed across, while the police car was blocked by a train passing by immediately after. Therefore, we needed to redetermine the location of the controlled vehicle. The second task was to immediately send personnel to the dispatch center of the bus company to extract the live video feed inside the vehicle transmitted back via the internet. The driver was currently still held hostage by the vehicle hijacker, his life hanging by a thread, and we could not afford to delay even for a single minute. In the case analysis room, everyone was extraordinarily busy. I quickly skimmed through the clues compiled after frontline police interrogated eyewitnesses, trying hard to suppress the anxiety in my heart. The testimonies of the eyewitnesses took myriad shapes, with some parts containing contradictions, and the useful information amounted to only a few points as follows. First, the perpetrator was male, an adult, and not yet considered an elderly person. Regarding the specific age, the estimates of the eyewitnesses had a very large discrepancy, with people mentioning anywhere from 20 to 50 years old. Second, the perpetrator held a weapon in his hand, which was pulled out from inside the cloth bag. This knife was suspected to be a type of cleaver used in households. The blade was covered in bloodstains, and it was highly probable that this was the weapon used to commit the crime. Third, when the perpetrator first boarded the bus, he showed no abnormal behavior, or at least the passengers on the vehicle did not pay attention to him. But after the human head rolled out, his emotions immediately became agitated, and he wielded the knife to threaten people everywhere, forbidding other passengers from moving, showing a very strong inclination to harm others. This information gave me a massive headache. The perpetrator was currently in a state of losing emotional control, held a knife in his hand, and had just killed someone, meaning his inclination to attack others again was immensely high. The driver was still held hostage by him, and his life safety was completely unguaranteed. At the same time, if the perpetrator truly killed the driver, after gaining control of the bus, there is no telling what other dangerous acts he might commit, and perhaps even more victims would appear. As the captain of the Criminal Investigation Detective Team of the Shicheng District Sub-Bureau, under the Zhenhai City Public Security Bureau, once this was handled poorly and allowed the perpetrator to cause greater casualties, I would absolutely find it hard to escape responsibility, and my future would be considered finished. Before long, the 2 dispatch groups returned with results. First was the situation regarding the controlled bus. The route of this vehicle was 617-1, belonging to the category of intercommune buses. Its regular travel itinerary started from Dagong Town in the eastern part of the inner-city area, and after passing through the inner city, ended its journey at Lin Sui village in Guangqiao Town. Within this, starting from Guangqiao Square, the bus would enter the mountainous region. The entire stretch of the road up to Lin Sui village consisted of mountain roads, and vehicles along the way were quite sparse. As for after the perpetrator took control of the bus, the vehicle was still moving toward Lin Sui village, not deviating from its original itinerary at all. Now, the vehicle had entered the mountainous region. inside the mountains, unlike the inner city area, forks in the road were not numerous, and the directions of movement the vehicle could choose were relatively few. Therefore, police resources would not be scattered due to having too many routes, but could be deployed in a more concentrated manner on these few roads. But the vehicle entering the mountainous region also carried distinct disadvantages. On one hand, if the perpetrator was driven into a corner and directly drove the vehicle off the road surface to die, along with the driver, we would have absolutely no way to prevent it. On the other hand, if the perpetrator got off the vehicle midway and then vanished into the deep mountains, the difficulty of the pursuit and capture would also increase significantly. Aside from the movement situation of the hijacked bus, we also obtained the video inside the vehicle provided by the bus company. The video only recorded the images during the time frame from when the perpetrator boarded the bus until the vehicle was taken control of. Afterward, the perpetrator used physical means to destroy the network connection between the surveillance device in the vehicle and the dispatch center, and the bus company no longer received subsequent surveillance images. Nonetheless, this segment of video also contained a considerable amount of information. First, the perpetrator boarded the bus at the number 5 middle school station. Second, the camera in the vehicle clearly captured the full frontal face of the perpetrator. Currently, the database had begun cross-checking, and before long, his identity could be determined. Third, the surveillance camera also captured the condition of the victim's head. The head wore a ponytail, from which it could be seen that the victim was highly likely female, but the victim's face seemed to have been slashed to pieces by a knife, making it impossible to distinguish further details. Fourth, after the human head rolled out, the perpetrator immediately held the knife to threaten those around him, but even when other passengers were quite close, he did not chase and hack them because they fled. Afterward, while threatening the driver to keep driving, the perpetrator only pointed the knife toward the driver without making any substantial attacking actions. Looking at it this way, at least during the duration recorded by the surveillance camera, the perpetrator still possessed rationality and had not reached the point of attacking indiscriminately. But the perpetrator currently having rationality did not mean he would always have rationality. His mental state was clearly unstable. By the time he truly took action against the driver, we would probably be powerless to save him. The urgent matter at hand was that the bus must be blocked. The police force of the Guangzhou Town Police Station had mobilized. Police cars from different police duty rooms set out one after another, proceeding to block and clear the 4 diverging roads leading toward that direction of movement. In addition, if it reached a point of absolute necessity, these police forces would use necessary measures to try to halt the bus completely. At the same time, the police station's drone had taken off and would monitor the fluctuations of the bus from high above. Relying solely on the forces of the police station was still not secure enough. Personnel from the Xiqing District Sub-Bureau were traveling by vehicle toward Guangzhou Town, personally led by the chief. Lao Huang, the deputy captain of our criminal investigation detective team, was also among them. He would participate in the negotiation work. In addition, the case had been reported to the City Bureau, and reinforcement forces from the City Bureau were rushing to the scene. The vanguard team of the Special Police would take a helicopter to Guangzhou Town. If there's a need for a forced assault later, they would be responsible for completing the task of subduing the perpetrator and rescuing the hostage. As for me, the person remaining on duty at the Sub-Bureau, I had to quickly investigate and clarify the suspect's identity to provide necessary information for the negotiation and assault work on the front line. Before long, the cross-checking of the facial information was completed. The perpetrator was named Ma Su, a local, married, and both of his parents had passed away. He was currently 35 years old, residing in room 406, Unit 3, Building Number 5, Hua Residential Quarter on Kong Street, and was an electrician for an interior decoration company. Only Ma Su and his wife lived in his home. The two had no children, and his parents-in-law lived in the countryside. His wife was named Zhong Lian, 33 years old, and her workplace was a primary school near the Hua Residential Quarter. What was noteworthy was that the Hua Residential Quarter was located right near the number 5 middle school, where Ma Su had boarded the bus. Synthesizing this information, a terrifying deduction immediately surfaced in my mind. The victim of this case might very well be Zhong Lian, Ma Su's wife. I immediately deployed tasks to my subordinates. Lao Lu, you immediately contact the Hong Kong police station and tell them to send personnel to Ma Su's home to check. If they knock on the door and no one answers, directly break the door down, paying attention when breaking the door to try not to damage the evidence at the scene. I will contact Chief Hu about the search warrant. Tell them not to worry. Furthermore, you also quickly lead people over there. Regardless of whether there is an issue or not, you will lead the search of Ma Su's home. Understood. Lao Lu received the order and immediately gathered his forces to set out. It was just that the Huahe residential quarter was located on the edge of the city, quite far from our sub-bureau. So, in the short term, we could not hope for Lao Lu's side to feedback results right away. To grasp the basic situation of the case as quickly as possible, I had personnel successively contact Zhong Lian herself, Zhong Lian's parents, and her workplace via telephone. At the same time, I also arranged personnel to find a way to contact Ma Su's workplace, wanting to see if anything could be asked. As expected, Zhong Lian's own telephone could not be reached. However, the telephones of her parents and her workplace were all connected. We did not introduce the details of the case to them, but only subtly implied that Zhong Lian was involved in a certain case. After a round of simple inquiries, we gathered a bit more information. The last time Zhong Lian's parents spoke on the phone with their daughter was yesterday, at which time there was still nothing abnormal. Today, they had not contacted their daughter and did not know what had happened on her side. Regarding the relationship between Zhong Lian and Ma Su, her parents mentioned that the two appeared very close and couldn't have any major conflicts. Zhong Lian's parents evaluated Ma Su very highly, considering him a particularly gentle husband who cared for the family, only that his personality seemed somewhat morose, and on the street, even when meeting acquaintances, he very rarely greeted them. The response from the school where Zhong Lian worked was that today, Zhong Lian said there was a matter at home, and she had requested leave and left the school after 9 o'clock. They were unclear about subsequent matters. On the side of Ma Su's workplace, there was not much useful information either. The person who answered the phone said Ma Su was not frequently at the company. If there was work, he directly went to the construction site. The impression he left on everyone during his working time was a morose personality. If there was no need in the work, he usually rarely paid attention to his colleagues, but was a person who only worked silently. The only thing the person answering the phone could confirm was that no one in the unit held a grudge against him because everyone was not close. We asked the other party again whether Ma Su went to work normally today. The other party responded that initially, Ma Su had gone to the construction site, but while he was in the middle of working, a phone call came into his mobile phone. After Ma Su finished listening to the phone call, he requested leave and left. His reason for requesting leave was very simple, consisting of only 5 characters. Family member is sick. Considering that Zhong Lian's current life or death was unclear, this so-called family member is sick carried a high probability of being an excuse casually found to get it over with. Regarding the timing when Ma Su listened to the phone call, the other party pointed out it was around 9 o'clock and 50 minutes. This timing was very interesting. It was after Zhong Lian returned home, but we remained unaware of who had called Ma Su, as well as what the two sides had said on the phone. The case situation seemed to still fall into a dead end. At the same time, the latest news was transmitted back from the front. The location of the bus had been discovered by the drone. Currently, the vehicle was driving on the mountain road leading to Tianjin County of the neighboring city. The trouble now lay in the fact that because there was still a hostage, the driver, inside the vehicle, when the police proceeded to intercept, they had to ensure the driver did not die or suffer severe injuries due to the interception behavior. Otherwise, we didn't know how many people in our city would be held accountable. Yet the mountain roads were steep and precipitous, and the bus possessed the characteristics of a large volume and heavy weight. So if we wanted to ensure the driver did not suffer excessive harm, the difficulty of the interception would be extremely high. The most secure way was to maximize the use of various tools such as tire shredding spike strips, interception nets, sandbags, specialized vehicles equipped with interception devices and shock-absorbing cushions, etc., to construct a comprehensive interception and protection system, trying to minimize the damage caused by collisions, as well as the possibility of secondary injuries, such as the vehicle plunging into an abyss or catching fire. But the problem was that the types of equipment at the Guangzhou Town Police Station were quite few, and reinforcement forces from various places could not reach the scene immediately in the absolute present. So, in the short term, except for tire-shredding spike strips, there were no other feasible interception measures. Nonetheless, even if measures were meager, rapid action remained utterly necessary. After all, the perpetrator's behavior was uncontrollable. The longer the time dragged on, the less the physical safety of the driver was guaranteed. Therefore, after the city bureau side conducted careful analysis and research, it was finally decided to let the police station's police car try to utilize the topographical characteristics of a specific road section, finding a way to stop the bus solely through tire-shredding spike strips. With the assistance of satellite images and computer programs, the city bureau found the best interception point. This interception point was located on a flat road section following a sequence of consecutive curves. On the left was a cliff, and on the right was a small square cleared by a certain village, currently mainly used for drying grain, and passing beyond that was still a cliff. Furthermore, this road section ahead and behind had no obvious slope, influenced by the bus's own inertia to ensure safety when entering curves. When passing through the consecutive curves, the vehicle would definitely have to reduce its speed. Taking advantage of the moment before the vehicle's speed had time to increase again, using tire-shredding spike strips placed on the ground to complete the gradual deflation of the tires could minimize the risk of the vehicle overturning or rolling onto its side. Thanks to this, the driver at least would not have to suffer physical injuries caused by the vehicle losing control due to the interception behavior itself. At the same time, both sides of the interception point were shielded by mountains, so there would be no danger of falling into an abyss. The feasibility and safety of this plan were quite high. Currently, the Guangzhou Town Police Station had transported the tire-shredding spike strips to the interception point by a drone. Police from the police duty room stationed in nearby villages had also driven vehicles to the scene, deploying the interception work under the video guidance of the City Bureau. The lightly equipped PTU, Police Patrol Unit, forces regularly stationed at the Guangzhou Town Police Station were proceeding to the scene at the fastest speed, which could effectively compensate for the lack of capacity to handle vicious cases of this type by the police at local duty rooms. Even if the current police force was insufficient to rescue the driver, it was at least sufficient to find a way to delay until reinforcements arrived. So overall, this plan was not considered excessively risky. In 7 minutes at most, the bus would be blocked. The chief personally called me, urging me to quickly put forward initial deductions about the case situation, so that the frontline forces would have a clear goal when negotiating with the perpetrator. But right now, Zhong Lian's whereabouts were still unknown, and the Ankang police station side was not certain to break the door into Ma Su's home before that time, while Ma Su's workplace failed to provide any useful clues, leaving a mere 7 minutes of time. Wanting to trace more information was extremely difficult. I was as frantic as an ant on a hot pan. Suddenly, a spark of inspiration flashed within me. Immediately call Zhong Lian's unit once more. Ask whether Zhong Lian tied her hair into a ponytail today. I ordered Xiao Jia beside me. Understood. Xiao Jia replied, immediately dialing the number to call out. After receiving the call, the school side immediately sought out the teachers in the same office as Zhong Lian to confirm. What surprised us was that they all asserted Zhong Lian did not tie her hair today. This time there was trouble. The dead persons had wore a ponytail, but Zhong Lian today did not tie her hair. Speaking this way, the victim was another person, and not Zhong Lian as I deducted. Then why could Zhong Lian's telephone not be reached? Aside from Zhong Lian, who else had contacted Ma Su today? My mind was tangled into a mass of absolute chaos. Having no other way, I could only truthfully report the currently available information to the frontline side. The information was mainly divided into two groups. One was a simple summary regarding Ma Su's identity, and the second was the investigation situation revolving around whether the dead person was Zhong Lian. The chief was somewhat irritated by the scarcity of information, but was also powerless to help, only able to see what suggestions the city bureau side had for the negotiation at the scene. In any case, at least the information about Ma Su himself carried some utility. He had no professional experience, such as having served in the military, something that could enhance resistance capacity against the police, nor did he have criminal records related to drugs or organized crime. backgrounds that could increase an individual's aggressiveness and danger level. Knowing this information, the personnel at the scene could make more accurate judgments about the situation. 7 minutes passed in the blink of an eye. The images transmitted back from the drone and the dash cam of the frontline police showed that after the bus cleared the final curve, it violently hucked into the obstacle placed in the middle of the road. But the very next second, its tires were punctured by the tire-shredding spike strips hidden behind. The tires slowly deflated, while the vehicle, due to its own inertia, still continued to rush forward for a segment. Fortunately, exactly as predicted earlier, the speed of the bus after passing the curve was quite slow, so it eventually came to a relatively stable stop. However, the image in the next second caused everyone's hearts to leap right up to their throats. Only the front door of the bus flung wide open, and the driver ran down from the vehicle in a panic, while his mouth shouted loudly, "Run quickly! The vehicle is about to explode." In an instant, the scene threw itself into a chaotic mass. The driver ran with long strides toward the police car, and as a result of being too panicked, he carelessly fell flat. Among the police, there were those who, after hearing the driver's words, instinctively took cover behind vehicles, but there were also courageous and deeply responsible individuals who rushed out, pulled the driver up in one yank, and dragged him to retreat toward a side with cover. Not far away, there originally were a few onlookers watching the excitement. Before the bus arrived, even if the police advised them 5 times and 7 times, they refused to leave. And the police, with pressing time and heavy tasks, ultimately didn't have time to chase them away. Now, having just heard that it was about to explode, they were so scared they didn't even bother to look back, turning their heads and running straight into the village. The expert from the city bureau used the communication device to shout loudly to direct everyone, but no one could absorb it anymore. There were 2 or 3 dogs following the crowd to watch the excitement that were startled out of their wits by the sudden commotion of the citizens. Among them, one dog, because it was too panicked, ran blindly, conversely rushing into the middle of the main road. The scene could be said to have chickens flying and dogs jumping. The chaotic crowd took more than 20 seconds before finally settling into quietness again. The ones who should run had run, the people who should hide had hidden, and everyone had reached the area they considered safe. However, the explosion still had not occurred. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, until 50 seconds passed. The police officer beside the driver finally noticed something wrong and asked, "Big brother, did you see the hijacker install a bomb? Furthermore, when you got off the vehicle, where was that hijacker?" I. The driver's voice trembled, clearly still not having collected his wits. Before he got off the vehicle, he took an item out, saying it was a bomb with a special activation device. He warned me that after the bomb started, it could measure the velocity of the bus, and if I stopped the vehicle before reaching Tianyan, the bomb would immediately detonate. "You mean he has already gotten off the vehicle?" A sharp police assistant caught the crucial problem. "Yes, he told me to stop the vehicle, then got off the vehicle to activate that thing, threw it onto my vehicle, and then warned me to quickly start the engine and drive away." Speaking to this point, everyone had already guessed the rough situation. It was estimated that the so-called bomb did not exist at all, and the perpetrator merely took something else to scare the driver. That perpetrator was extremely cunning. Looking at it, he knew clearly the police would definitely arrange encirclement tactics for the bus, which was why he got off the vehicle early on, yet worried that after the driver stopped the vehicle, the police would quickly determine his location, hence lying that there was a bomb, forcing the driver to continue driving to Tianyan County in order to attract the attention of the police forces. Of course, to be safe, it was currently still impossible to approach the bus. The leadership of the city bureau used the communication device to direct the police officers to withdraw the driver to a safe area, and at the same time instructed them to first disperse the nearby citizens. In a few minutes, the PTU forces would be present. They would use robot dogs to conduct a preliminary inspection of the vehicle. By the time the special forces of the city bureau arrived, they would take over the work here to conduct a more comprehensive search of the vehicle. These matters no longer concerned our criminal investigation detective team much. Our current mission mainly consisted of 2 tasks. One was to investigate and clarify the identity of the victim. The second was to coordinate with other departments to find the direction of Masu's path. The immediate task was relatively difficult to resolve because, according to the driver's narrative, when Ma-Su got off the vehicle, he had probably carried the head segment of the corpse. But Ma-Su only carried the head segment. The victim's body was highly likely still inside his home. So after the police station people broke the door into Ma-Su's home, there should be an opportunity to determine who the dead person was. Before that, we could set to work analyzing the direction of Ma-Su's path. Truthfully speaking, failing to recognize that Ma-Su had gotten off the vehicle early on was an error in our strategy. Actually, initially, the drone could have lowered its altitude to observe the situation inside the vehicle. But at that time, out of concern about startling the snake by pulling the vine, fearing the appearance of the drone would agitate the perpetrator and cause him to harm the hostage, the leadership of the city bureau required the drone to always maintain flying at a high altitude. Doing so naturally had its rationale, but the consequence was also very clear. We spent a long stretch of time without discovering the perpetrator was no longer on the vehicle. The good news was that based on the images transmitted back by the drone, from the moment the drone began tracking the bus until this very present, the silhouette of anyone getting off the vehicle had never appeared within the frame. This was equivalent to Ma-Su having gotten off the vehicle before the drone found the bus, based on which the search scope could be significantly narrowed. The bad news was that, because we discovered it too late, the perpetrator might have already departed far from the road, and the search would carry a certain difficulty. Through the communication device of the police at the scene, we conducted a simple interrogation of the driver. Sadly, the driver said at that time he was already scared stupid. So when the perpetrator got off the vehicle, he did not pay attention to the time marker displayed on the smart screen at the driving position. I am afraid that Ma-Su using the excuse of a bomb to threaten the driver to drive to Tianyang County, instead of threatening the driver to drive for a specific duration of time, was also to prevent the driver from paying attention to the specific time marker when he got off the vehicle. But what the driver could confirm was that Ma-Su got off the vehicle after entering the mountains for a period of time. Captain Dai, what to do for the next step? Xiao Jia, my subordinate, asked. At which village was the bus blocked? I asked. It seems to be called Sanyan-Jing Village. Starting from the road section entering the mountains up to Sanyan-Jing Village, this entire area must be searched. This matter you do not need to worry about. La Huang will go to coordinate with the subordinate police stations and the city bureau side. I continued. You first send Ma-Su's photo to the leadership of nearby villages, telling them to pay attention to this person. Ma-Su, riding the bus, must have wanted to go dispose of the body, and now having been unexpectedly driven into the deep mountains, he definitely possesses no reserve supplies. Who knows? He might take advantage of the moment before he has wanted to slip into the village to obtain daily necessities. Yes, sir. Is there anything else that needs to be done? The mountains search requires a great deal of police force. The people Lao Huang took along are probably insufficient, and moreover they left in a hurry, so they didn't carry too much equipment. I want to find a few more people, and set out over there right now to reinforce the scene. I replied, Understood. Xiao Jia obeyed the order and went to arrange the work. The department in charge of monitoring public opinion transmitted back feedback, saying that this case had currently caused a wave of shock on the network. The event, no matter what, had already spread, and wanting to hide it was completely impossible. Currently, the only path was that the case must be quickly solved. In recent years, Zhenhai City had always emphasized developing the tourism industry, and whether the public security environment was good or bad would directly affect the number of tourists. If we cannot solve the case within a short time, I am afraid the image of Zhenhai City would suffer a heavy blow. Fortunately, at least the clues of this case were not difficult to exploit. I sat down, intending to rearrange my line of thought a bit, when the command post received new word from the Hong Kong police station. Their police officers had reached Ma-Su's home. After breaking the door in, inside the home there indeed was a headless corpse. This matter fell within expectations. But what surprised me was that the police station side also mentioned an even more horrifying matter. Both hands of the dead person had been severed by someone, and the hands were missing, their whereabouts unknown. Perhaps the pair of hands of the victim also lay inside the cloth bag Ma-Su carried onto the bus. The police station confirmed there was no one else in the home. They also briefly described the characteristics of the dead person's clothing. I instructed them to protect the scene and do not arbitrarily enter the home. Following that, I contacted Lao Lu again, reminding them that after arriving at the destination, besides inspecting the crime scene and conducting field investigations of the neighbors, the critical focus needed to be checking the surveillance of the nearby area to determine whether Zhong Lian had entered the stairwell after 9 o'clock today, as well as whether Zhong Lian had departed from the stairwell before Ma Su left. If Zhong Lian had entered the stairwell and not departed, then the victim carried a high probability of being her. Afterward, I had personnel call the school where Zhong Lian worked, asking them about the clothing characteristics of Zhong Lian today. The work efficiency on that side was quite good, very quickly sending over a screenshot from a surveillance camera. The surveillance image was quite clear. In the picture, Zhong Lian wore a khaki windbreaker jacket on the outside, paired with a white shirt inside, and trousers for the lower part, basically matching the clothing characteristics the police station had responded with. It appeared that Zhong Lian, I am afraid, was indeed the dead person. It was just that if Ma Su truly had killed Zhong Lian, then what was his motive for committing the crime? According to the narrative of Zhong Lian's parents, the marital relationship of the two was very harmonious, and moreover, recently they had not heard a whisper of any conflict, no matter how one looked at it. Ma Su had no reason to perform an act of extreme ferocity to this extent. I could not understand his motive at all. Furthermore, the behavior of severing the head and the pair of hands of the corpse was both terrifying and bizarre, leaving people with no way to comprehend it. Ultimately, how great a resentment was it that caused him to cruelly murder his wife, and even destroy the corpse to this extent? I thought over it but could not make sense of it. In the final analysis, currently the information in our hands was too little. Wanting to analyze this case more deeply, it was estimated we still had to wait for the results of the scene inspection or wait for Ma Su to fall into the net. A few minutes later, Lao Lu's group reached the scene. The investigation work was deployed comprehensively. Lao Lu briefly reported the work plans to me: the scene inspection, autopsy, field investigation, extraction of surveillance footage, etc. All had specialized teams in charge. Before long, this case would surely have progress. The team with the earliest results was the team checking the surveillance cameras. Although the Huahe residential quarter was an old quarter, it underwent a comprehensive renovation last year, and currently the surveillance scope covered all stairwell entrances, bringing immense convenience to our investigation work. Because Zhong Lian's workplace had previously provided the rough time marker when she left the school, and we grasped the time Ma Su boarded the vehicle, the time frame that needed actual reviewing was quite small. This was the reason this team could complete the task within a short time. According to what the surveillance displayed, at 9 o'clock and 37 minutes in the morning, Zhong Lian entered the stairwell of Unit 3. From then until the absolute moment Lao Lu's group arrived, the surveillance camera never captured her silhouette a single time again. The entrance and exit of the stairwell had only the single path, and inside the building, no traces of her were found either. Therefore, it could basically be determined now that the dead person was Zhong Lian. What was noteworthy was that the surveillance image also provided an additional piece of information. Ma Su returned home at 10 o'clock and 15 minutes in the morning, and afterward carried that cloth bag to depart from the stairwell at 11 o'clock and 22 minutes in the middle of the day. After obtaining this information, two doubts naturally arose in our hearts. One was, why did Zhong Lian return home? The second was, why did Ma Su return home? According to the previous feedback from Zhong Lian's school, the reason she said she had to return home was because there is a matter at home. Yet this way of phrasing was too vague, lacking useful information. As for Ma Su's reason for requesting leave being family member is sick, it could basically be determined this was a fabricated excuse. It appeared that wanting to clarify the cause of their returning home required finding other clues. Thus, I had personnel contact the telecom network provider to extract the call history of the two. In addition, I also reminded the scene inspection personnel to pay attention to searching for Zhong Lian's phone. Even if the call history could be extracted, it would be impossible to know the content of the dialogue. But if the two sides had texted via WeChat or QQ about something, it was highly probable that useful clues would be left behind. A moment later, the team responsible for conducting field investigations of the surrounding neighbors also had important information to feed back. A segment of neighbors stated they themselves were not close to Zhong Lian and Ma Su. Another segment considered the two of them very loving, and even squabbles very rarely occurred. Among this information, there was a piece of feedback that attracted our attention. This information came from the resident of room 506, living right on the floor above Ma Su's home. That resident was an old lady who had been retired for more than 60 years. According to her words, she didn't know what time it was this morning, but in room 406, there seemed to be people arguing, the bickering lasting for about 5 or 6 minutes. Specifically, what they argued about, she did not hear clearly. But while they were arguing midway, one person among them probably truly could not suppress her emotions, and in her agitation shouted out 2 rather loud sentences. "Since when did you consider us family? Why do you only have this single sentence every single day?" The old lady asserted that the person shouting the sentence was a female voice. It appeared that the act of Ma Su murdering Zhong Lian was intimately related to this argument. It was just that the old lady did not remember clearly the specific time of the argument. She could only rely on her own daily routine to roughly deduct that the argument occurred within the frame from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock. This time frame was too wide, carrying little meaning. In addition, what was the cause that made the two argue? Disagreement over economic decisions? Emotional entanglements? Incompatible personalities? Or just other minor, insignificant matters? I did not have any clues. However, the fact that Zhong Lian could utter the sentence, "Since when did you consider us family?" spoke to a very large problem. The conflict between the two had actually existed for a long time, only that due to certain considerations they had hidden this in front of outsiders, creating a fake appearance of being loving. The root of the conflict was not merely a single specific event that led to the argument this time, but had struck deep roots in the long-term discord between the two. It was just that even Zhong Lian's parents and the neighbors of both failed to discover the conflict between them. So the difficulty of our wanting to investigate the cause leading to this discordant relationship was very large. Instead of lingering on this forever, it would be better to wait until Ma Su was caught and then directly interrogate him. Currently, the pursuit of Ma Su had been deployed on a comprehensive scale. Unmanned aerial vehicles monitored from high above, using optical and thermal imaging methods to comb for traces of Ma Su. A large amount of police and sniffer dogs set out from several points with the possibility of entering the mountains to conduct tracking on the ground. Ma Su could not hide for much longer. The preliminary autopsy results were already available. The wounds on the corpse did not stop merely at the 3 locations of the neck area and the wrists of both hands. The abdomen area of the dead person was also wounded by a sharp weapon puncture, leading to a severed artery and a large volume of blood loss. According to the forensic deduction, the wound in the abdomen was the fatal wound that caused the death. The act of the skull and hands of the dead person being severed was probably something that occurred after the victim had already died. The forensics also mentioned that the wound in the abdomen and the wounds on the neck, as well as the wrists, were suspected to be caused by different types of knives. The cut on the neck had a very obvious phenomenon of skin and muscle fiber tearing. The cross-section of the cervical vertebrae was rough and uneven, and at the same time numerous hacking marks remained on the soft tissue and neck bones, clearly created by a type of knife possessing a long blade and heavy weight, hacking with force. The wounds on the wrists also possessed similar characteristics, but the wound in the abdomen of the dead person took the form of a fissure, probably formed by a type of knife possessing a pointed and slender tip puncturing inward. In addition, the police officers inspecting the scene responded that currently no traces of the corpse being dragged a long distance after death were discovered. The corpse was found in the living room, and the first crime scene was precisely the living room. Combined with the shouts the neighbors had mentioned, these clues could help deduct the rough situation when the case occurred. At that time, Ma Su and Zhong Lian should have had an argument occur in the living room. In his agitation, Ma Su held a type of knife like a fruit paring knife and punctured Zhong Lian's body, leading to her death. After Zhong Lian died, Ma Su used a cleaver or a bone-chopping knife to sever the head segment and both hands of the corpse, and at the same time slashed the face and head of the victim to pieces, afterward putting them into a cloth bag. What was even more bizarre than anything else was that the surveillance displayed as clear as day that today, Zhong Lian truly did not tie her hair into a ponytail. That meant it was highly probable that after killing Zhong Lian, Ma Su tied this hairstyle for her. This chain of behavior caused people to involuntarily shiver with fear. In the case analysis room, no one dared assert what intention Ma Su's actions of severing the head and hands stemmed from. To facilitate body disposal, or purely to vent anger. It seemed either option had a possibility. But whether it was body disposal or venting anger, neither could explain the implication of the hair-tying action. There was a veteran criminal investigation detective who, based on his decades of experience solving cases, put forward a bold hypothesis. I have a thought. Ma Su doing this is perhaps based on a certain type of perverted emotional need. Explain more clearly? Intuitively, I also considered this behavior very abnormal, carrying a high probability of being based on some emotional causes. The relationship between Ma Su and Zhong Lian recently was extremely tense, even reaching the point of killing, but it cannot be denied that at least they once had years of close intimacy. This old comrade who was about to retire analyzed. After all, if the two had never loved each other, then when in front of others, they neither needed to nor possessed the capacity to act out such a loving appearance. And there is a possibility like this. During the phase when they loved each other passionately, perhaps Zhong Lian had the habit of tying her hair into a ponytail. The lover he once loved deeply years ago versus the wife he now looked at only with detestation, cold relationship, and frequent friction, in Ma Su's eyes, had gradually split into two different people. The ponytail represents a Zhong Lian he loved, while the long hair not tied up represents a Zhong Lian he detested. Ultimately, when he murdered his wife due to marital conflict, he wanted to use this method to look once more at the perfect lover in his mind. Therefore, his tying the hair for the corpse carries a high probability of having this element of emotional identification inside. During the final period spent beside a dead Zhong Lian, he hoped the person adjacent to him was the Zhong Lian of the old days. His deduction possessed a certain rationale. I expressed agreement with it. But whether the truth in the final analysis was like that, perhaps only Ma Su himself could know. The pursuit of Ma Su had the latest progress. A citizen in the village reported to the police that he had seen Ma Su. After receiving this news, the frontline personnel group of Lao Huang on one hand rushed to set out for the scene where Ma Su was discovered, and on the other hand, inquire about detailed information from that village citizen via telephone. On the phone, the village citizen introduced the specific situation. He was a citizen of Hujia village in Guangxiao town and opened a small grocery store in the village. Today, after our sub-bureau sent Ma Su's photo to the leadership of nearby villages, the cadres of Hujia village forwarded the photo into the village's WeChat group to remind everyone to pay attention to this character. This grocery store owner, having just viewed the photo, recognized this person looked very familiar, seemingly having come to his store to buy water a few times. But because he was unclear about Ma Su's background and didn't know who this person in the final analysis was, he didn't think much of it at that time. It was just that not long after that, he received a phone call from a person in the same village. That village citizen said that when he came down from the mountain, he saw someone stealing persimmons belonging to the grocery store owner. Immediately after receiving the news, the grocery store owner grabbed an iron bar and rushed up the mountain to catch the thief. Those few persimmons weren't worth much money, but over the years the owner had been stolen from too much and could not swallow this anger. So he always wanted to catch the thief to teach the other party a lesson. The result was that midway, he clashed right into Ma Su, who was coming from the other side of the mountain road. The owner instinctively greeted Ma Su, but immediately after, he regretted it. Although the village cadre did not explain clearly what this person had done, they explicitly asserted he was very dangerous, advising everyone not to approach. Therefore, the grocery store owner to some extent also guessed that this fellow probably bore a life case on him. Greeting a fleeing killer was no different from stating bluntly to the other party that he had recognized him, and a slight slip could lead to being killed to silence him. Fortunately, Ma Su only looked at him a few times, seemingly not recognizing who he was, and then just left on his own. After escaping death by a hair's breadth and gradually calming down, the grocery store owner sought out a place with phone signal to call and report to the police immediately. After clarifying the course of the event, Lao Huang asked the store owner 3 supplementary questions. First, was the person stealing persimmons Ma Su? Second, could the store owner be certain the person coming to his house to buy water was Ma Su? And when did he go to buy? Third, could the direction of Ma Su's movement only be down the mountain into Hujia village, or were there other forks? The grocery store owner answered each question in turn. Regarding the first question, he had asked the village citizen, who reminded him about the persimmons being stolen. The other party asserted very firmly that the thief stealing persimmons was a family of 3. The husband in that family had a short stature, was slightly fat, and could not be the Ma Su the police were searching for. Regarding the second question, the owner considered his own memory quite good, so he would not mistake the person. As for the time of buying water, he stated that in the past nearly 1 year, Ma Su had come to the store 5 or 6 times. The specific time he did not remember clearly, but he could assert it was on Tuesdays or Sundays, because at other times he had to go to work. The person watching the store was an elderly person in the house, and not himself. The store owner also added that the elderly person in his house, after viewing the photo of Ma Su, had absolutely no impression of this person. Regarding the third question, he mentioned that that direction would pass through a 3-way intersection. Besides going down the mountain into Hujia village, one could also go up the mountain to Lingtuan Peak. There, forks were more numerous, and whether switching directions halfway up the mountain or crossing Lingtuan Peak, it could connect to very many other places. He could also follow the small path between 2 mountains to reach Wangjie village, located not far from Hujia village. Since the person stealing persimmons was not Ma Su, the crucial clues the grocery store owner provided would consist of the following 2 things. First, Ma Su had once come to Hujia village. His choosing this place to dispose of the body and hide carried a high probability of being based on his own familiarity with the terrain, landform, and other aspects of the nearby area. But ultimately, how familiar he was with this place was a problem worth pondering. We temporarily did not know whether he came here to relax, work, or visit relatives and friends. Hence, we cannot predict his level of understanding of this place. The second crucial clue lay in the fact that if the grocery store owner's feedback had no issues, then the critical area to search for Ma Su had to be placed at the stretch of Hujia village, Lingtuan Peak, and Wangjie village. Currently, the relevant leaders of the City Public Security Bureau had coordinated the police forces of various sides to deploy the search within this scope. If nothing unexpected occurred, Ma Su would fall into the net this very day. Yet at this moment, a new clue from Lao Lu's side conversely caused the case details to once more become complicated and difficult to predict. The new clue came from the daughter of the old lady in room 506. After knowing the news that the police were investigating the matter in room 406, she and her mother had a simple chat via telephone, which caused the old lady to remember a detail. During the daytime, an express delivery order for the old lady's daughter was delivered to the front of the door. The courier knocked on the door, but at that time the old lady was watering flowers, so she didn't notice. Because this item did not need face-to-face signing, the courier placed the item down, took a photo, and then left. And the timing when the courier knocked on the door was after the sound of the argument ended. The old lady's daughter provided the contact method of the courier. Lao Lu's side immediately called. The other party, after looking up the delivery history, asserted clearly that he had delivered the order to the door of room 506 at exactly 10 o'clock and 7 minutes. In other words, the sound of the argument at the latest did not exceed 10 o'clock and 7 minutes. However, the timing when Ma Su walked into the hallway after returning home was 10 o'clock and 15 minutes. In other words, at the scene there carried a high probability of the existence of a third person. Now it could be asserted that that argument was absolutely not a direct argument between Ma Su and Zhong Lian. Therefore, either Zhong Lian argued with another person via mobile phone, or she argued with a third person whom we hadn't paid attention to right at home. Both possibilities above could absolutely not be eliminated. The call history from Zhong Lian's phone number had been extracted. Today, she had an exchange via telephone with a certain teacher about work at the unit regarding what the specific content said. Technical measures could not be used to check, but after inquiring with the school and that teacher, it was determined this call was unrelated to the case. Aside from that, today she had no additional call history, based on the SIM card. Perhaps she had communicated with others on WeChat, QQ, or DingTalk, but at the crime scene, Zhong Lian's phone was not found, and the procedure to go to relevant companies to extract information, such as online chat history, was quite cumbersome. So within a short time, it was very difficult to determine whether she was arguing with anyone via phone. We also checked Ma Su's phone, but today he also had no call history via SIM card. However, his colleagues said they saw him answer a phone call, so the call he received should also be a network call, and network calls we temporarily cannot trace right away. Even so, this did not prevent us from conducting further investigations. I instructed Lu to dispatch people to check the surveillance cameras once more. Through the cross-checking between the residents in the building and the people who entered and exited the hallway in the recording today, to find out whether there was any other suspicious character. Intuition told me that our deductions about the case details had perhaps defaulted at some link already. The scene inspection work had a new discovery. Inside the room, there were only the shoe prints of Ma Su alone, and on different furniture items, no fingerprints of anyone else aside from him could be extracted. The problem here was too glaringly exposed. Since Zhong Lian was murdered at home, inside the home it was impossible for there to be no shoe prints and fingerprints of her. It was obvious that after Zhong Lian died, Ma Su cleared the scene, erasing all traces that could remain, but he did not leave the house immediately. Therefore, inside the room, the shoe prints and fingerprints of himself appeared once more. At the same time, according to my suggestion, the surveillance team completed the reviewing and cross-checking of the people entering and exiting the hallway today. A total of 4 people who were not residents of this building were discovered entering and exiting. Within this, the suspicion regarding a woman was extremely large. This person, when entering the building, wore a white one-piece dress, but when departing, that dress had disappeared, replaced instead by a khaki knit shirt and a red overcoat jacket. At the scene, the one-piece dress was not found. However, that person carried a rather large cloth bag, and it was highly probable the dress had been put inside it. Lu looked through Zhong Lian's wardrobe and discovered that on a hanger, 2 positions were clearly empty. These 2 empty positions were highly likely to belong respectively to the windbreaker Zhong Lian wore today, and the red coat that the suspicious woman had worn. In addition, the surveillance team also determined the time of entering and exiting the hallway for this person. Entered the building at 9 o'clock and 45 minutes, departed at 10 o'clock and 28 minutes. Calculating according to the time, she and Ma Su surely had a time frame of being together inside Ma Su's home. Among the 3 remaining people, one was the courier, one was the hourly maid of house 205, and one had an unidentified identity. But the suspicion level of all 3 was distinctly lower compared to this woman who had changed her clothes. Sadly, when she arrived or left, she wore a hat, the brim pressed down very low, so the surveillance camera could not record her face. However, the clue had not been broken at all. Check all the surrounding surveillance cameras, from residential quarters, stores, down to the roads. All must be combed clean. I ordered. This person definitely is involved in the death of Zhong Lian. According to deductions from the situation at the scene, the culprit is someone who killed in a fit of rage. That being the case, I don't believe when she arrived she possessed the awareness to evade surveillance cameras in such a systematic manner. The case seemed to have gradually exposed a bit of a clue. Ma Su clearing the crime scene, I am afraid, was precisely to erase the traces of this person's existence, wanting to help her discard all involvement in the case. But who was that person? Was she Ma Su's lover or relative? What role did she play in this case? Was she the culprit who murdered Zhong Lian, or Ma Su's accomplice? Or merely a witness who knew the matter but did not report it? Although many doubts remained, I had a hypothesis that could chain all clues together. This case might very well be a murder case over an affair. Ma Su had an extramarital relationship, and naturally Zhong Lian could in no way accept this matter. Therefore, Zhong Lian invited the third party to her home wanting to speak clearly, or there's also a possibility the other party actively sought the door to negotiate with Zhong Lian about Ma Su's matter. But the negotiation proceeded not smoothly at all. The 2 sides developed conflict during this process, and a fierce argument occurred. When the matter escalated, the third party, due to being overcome by a fit of rage or some emotion that overrode rationality, took action and killed Zhong Lian. After receiving the notification, Ma Su rushed back home immediately. Obviously, the weight of the third party in his heart far exceeded Zhong Lian. He told the third party to depart first, afterward remaining alone to clear the scene and prepare to help that person dispose of the corpse. Only he didn't expect that even before the head segment of the corpse had time to be discarded, his matter was exposed. Of course, the above were merely my deductions. However, the current evidence all pointed toward this possibility. If the truth was indeed like this, then it truly made people sigh and utter. There are matters carrying the characteristic of breaking moral boundaries that can truly cause a person to feel the evil of human nature in the most direct manner. After 6 o'clock in the evening, Ma Su fell into the net. He was discovered inside an ancient tomb from the Qing dynasty among the undulating mountain ranges. This was a small tomb on the mountain, the overall area being only about 2 square meters. The mountainous area around Guangzhou town had not undergone much development, so small-scale tombs from the Qing dynasty or the Republican era like this were still quite numerous. More than 10 years ago, this region once had tomb raiders operating. They dug up very many ancient tombs, and this tomb was one among them. Due to its specific position, the opening the tomb raider dug out still existed up to now, without being buried by mud. When Ma Su passed by the tomb raider's opening, I am afraid he paid attention to the police drone, which was why he crawled from that opening into the tomb to hide. He himself originally possessed no strength left, added to the fact of being unable to know when the drone would leave. So he had to lie down to rest for a while right inside the tomb. Only he didn't expect the police side would still find him. Not long after clashing into the grocery store owner, Ma Su no longer walked along the mountain road, but directly crossed areas covered by vegetation. The benefit of walking like this was that the itinerary of movement was completely unpredictable, but the disadvantages were also very clear. One was that it was quite dangerous, but Ma Su fortunately encountered no significant injuries. Second was that those traces of trampled vegetation were very easily discovered. The police precisely followed these traces to determine the rough activity area of Ma Su, afterward relying on sniffer dogs to bring him to justice. Sadly, at the scene of capturing Ma Su, the police could not find the corpse pieces, knives, cloth bag, and the phones of both Ma Su and Zhong Lian. Ma Su refused to disclose the location where these items were hidden. Lao Huang immediately dispatched people to escort Ma Su back to our sub-bureau, while himself leading people to continue scouring the mountain, determined to find these items of evidence right in the night. After 7 o'clock in the evening, the interrogation of Ma Su began, but sadly, he always maintained silence, preferring to die rather than disclose any information. Fortunately, he was not the sole breakthrough. After conducting a reverse investigation into the trajectory of the white-dressed woman's movements before entering the hallway, the police determined her identity and residence. Lu Ying, a local, 35 years old, unemployed, residing in room 702, building 65, Xingfu Kuiliyuan Quarter. Initially, we checked the social relationships between her and Ma Su, but found nothing. However, when we switched our direction of thinking, checking the relationship between her and Zhong Lian, the clue immediately exposed itself. She was Zhong Lian's maternal older cousin. We quickly deployed personnel at the highest speed to go to Lu Ying's home, but ultimately we missed. Lu Ying was not home. We were not certain whether she fled out of fear of the crime or merely went out temporarily, so we arranged a group of people to lie in ambush nearby. At the same time, the teams of personnel checking the surveillance cameras were still striving to battle. They were reviewing every single camera from the start of the street to the end of the alley, trying to find Lu Ying's direction after leaving Ma Su's home. When leaving, Lu Ying intentionally avoided surveillance lenses, causing the difficulty in our work to increase not a little. What was joyful was that her silhouette still appeared scattered in a few surveillance clips. 8 o'clock at night. Ma Su still refused to confess anything. He kept repeating that he was innocent. Toward any question from the police regarding the details of the case, he completely answered evasively, not putting forward any direct response. No matter how one looked at it, he resembled someone intentionally stretching out time. Seeing the interrogation persistently have no progress, I decided to personally enter the battle to try and see. After knocking on the door, I did not wait for a response inside, but directly pushed the interrogation room door and walked in. Lao Feng, you go rest for a moment, I said to a veteran comrade inside. Lao Feng was stunned for a moment, nodded, and then left. I held the paper cup in my hand, slowly sat down, pretending to casually flip through the notebook in the hand of the young police officer beside me. Actually, what they had said, I had heard everything from start to finish. Now it was just putting on an act. After finishing flipping through the notebook, I casually tossed it to one side and then looked toward Ma Su. Lao Ma, I see you have resisted the whole day. Aren't you tired? Do you want to drink some water? Rest assured, I haven't drunk it yet. As I spoke, I pointed at the water cup I brought in. Ma Su flashed a polite smile but did not comply. Officer, no need to trouble you. If you have a matter, just speak directly. Sigh. I let out a sigh. All right. Then I won't be courteous with you either. First, let me introduce myself briefly. My surname is Dai, the captain of the Criminal Investigation Detective Team of the Xiqing Sub-Bureau. Lao Feng has a somewhat hot temper, and his words were perhaps a bit unpleasant to hear, so don't take it to heart. I came over here only wanting to clarify a single problem. Ultimately, why did you want to take control of that bus? Officer, when you guys caught me, I already told you I am just a mountain climber. When passing by that tomb, I wanted to crawl inside to explore a bit, and as a result, I was caught by you guys for no rhyme or reason. Those matters about buses or human heads you guys speak of, I completely know nothing at all. Ma Su began to speak absolute nonsense. I nodded, not confronting him harshly as Lao Feng had done. Lao Ma, I can understand you. Humans living in the world. Who doesn't have a few people they want to protect? I can see that actually, by nature, you're a very good person. If you truly lost your moral boundary, would you release so many passengers on the bus like that? When getting off the vehicle, would you not kill the driver to silence him? When clashing into that grocery store owner, would you not kill him to avoid exposing your track? I know you're not a bad person. That's why I thought, could there have been some misunderstanding that led to the current situation? Do we have the capacity to untie this misunderstanding? These words I spoke went against my conscience. Naturally, I didn't think Ma Su was any kind of good sort, nor did I assume after hearing these words he would alter his own attitude. I only wanted to create an illusion for him, that I came here to play the good guy. Once he formed such a concept, I would abruptly shift my attitude, unleashing some evidence we held. Only like that could I create massive psychological pressure for him. Exactly as predicted, he failed to admit anything. Officer, I truly don't know what you are saying. I indeed possess a moral boundary. In my whole life, even a chicken I haven't killed. So how could I kill a person for no rhyme or reason? I shook my head, weaving both hands together and placing them on the table, my face displaying helplessness. Ma Su, I'll speak straight with you. We have traced to Lu Ying's place. Hearing this sentence, on Ma Su's face there was no expression, but the unconscious small movement of his fingers told me that this news caused him to begin to tense up. The matter of killing is not something where, by evading the problem, you can escape the crime. Kiske, one stab in the abdomen, afterwards switching to a knife to chop the head down. Vicious enough, wouldn't you say? I continued. You want to protect the person in your heart, I can understand. But we feel you have a problem, based on which we suspect the person in your heart, and by that time the suspicion, conversely, will all pour onto her alone. Look at it. Are you protecting her like this, or are you harming her? Ma Su bowed his head down, then raised his head up, his attitude finally having a bit of a shake. Officer, can you give me time to think carefully? Half an hour. Give me half an hour of time. I nodded. All right, half an hour. After half an hour, I hope to hear your answer. Stepping out of the interrogation room, Lao Feng approached right close beside me. Boss, I see he's still finding a way to stretch out time. Do you truly give him half an hour? I know he's stretching out time, I said. The problem is, if I don't agree, will he obediently and honestly tell us the truth? That is illusory. I see even after half an hour passes, he isn't certain to confess. The urgent matter currently remains that we must catch Lu Ying. The matter of breaking his psychological defense line, I will still leave to you. Understood, Lao Feng replied. This trip, though Ma Su still had said nothing, was also not entirely without harvest. I obtained a few pieces of information I wanted. First, Ma Su's unconscious physical reactions showed he cared immensely about whether Lu Ying was paid attention to by the police side. Second, when I suggested his non-cooperation would lead to our incorrect judgment regarding Lu Ying's crime details, Ma Su's first reaction was still to stretch out time toward whether Lu Ying was involved in the case or not. He neither denied nor affirmed. If he wanted to help Lu Ying escape the crime, then at this time he more or less should put forward a bit of information, regardless of whether to gain trust from us or to mislead us. But he conversely only simply requested to give him half an hour to think. This coping strategy caused me to vaguely feel that, at least at this moment, Ma Su did not care at all about how to help Lu Ying escape the crime legally, but cared more about how to dispute time for her to flee. As for the problem of whether Lu Ying should flee or stay, Ma Su definitely knew clearly, because after the case occurred, they could in no way avoid discussing this matter. Since Ma Su's coping measures toward the interrogation were put forward aiming at the fleeing situation instead of staying, it could indirectly prove one thing. Lu Ying carried a high probability of having chosen the fleeing option. She was not at home, and it was not due to going out temporarily. Thus, I ordered the police lying in ambush before Lu Ying's home to leave only a small segment to continue monitoring, while the rest went to assist colleagues who were extracting surveillance to find Lu Ying's direction. At the same time, I also told Xiao Jia to lead people to check the social relationships of Ma Su and Lu Ying, to see whether the two of them knew anyone working in the fishery industry, water transport, or water tourism. The economies of the cities surrounding our Yinhai city were all quite developed, and the coverage of surveillance cameras was very high. If Lu Ying fled to those cities, she would be considered unable to hide. Evading within the mountain ranges around Yinhai was also not a long-term plan, because after all, inside the mountains, there were no daily conditions necessary for modern humans. Therefore, the most feasible fleeing direction for Lu Ying was to board a ship to go abroad. Before this, I had requested the chief to coordinate with relevant departments to note Lu Ying's movements in transportation, entry-exit issues, which plus current measures, could basically hem Lu Ying to death within Yinhai. Very quickly after that, an additional new clue was sent over. The call history of Lu Ying had been extracted. At 2:30 this afternoon, she had called a certain person. I told the person calling to contact the other party to ask clearly about the conversation details. After hearing we were police, that person disclosed everything without a shred of hiding. He said he was a mahjong friend of Lu Ying. The two met at a mahjong table 3 years ago, and their relationship was also not very close. Lu Ying knew he worked selling light bulbs to foreigners, so today she called to ask whether he could use his relationships to secretly send a person to Central Asia. In return, Lu Ying put forward a compensation fee of 100,000 yuan. This fellow, though a money-grubbing sort, truly lacked the capacity to do this matter because for container shipping, he hired specialized external companies, and he himself completely had no contact with these operational areas. So he could only refuse Lu Ying. When receiving this news, we still felt a bit surprised. Proceeding along inland roads to go abroad was definitely unfeasible because, after all, Yinhai City was located very far from our country's land border. Traveling by land took a great deal of time and was extremely easy to catch. But we didn't expect Lu Ying truly intended to do so. I felt a bit speechless. For us, this could also be considered good news because previously, after exchanging with other units, land routes have been strictly guarded, and even if Lu Ying could leave Yinhai, she couldn't run very far. In addition, we proceeded to question Zhong Lian's parents once more. This time, we no longer hid from them what Zhong Lian had suffered. The two were grief-stricken beyond measure, but still braced themselves to provide clues for us. They said that the relationship between Lu Ying and their family was not close at all. More than 10 years ago, she once lied that she was about to execute a project that made a lot of money to entice relatives to invest. Zhong Lian's parents also put out 30,000 yuan, and the ultimate result was losing both principal and interest completely. Later they learned that project was a typical Ponzi scheme model. Whether Lu Ying knew beforehand it was a scam, they were unclear, but at that time all the interest money the scammers paid back was swallowed entirely by Luing alone, while for the defrauded principal money, she refused to bear a single cent. This caused the relatives in their clan to be very indignant, all considering her an unreliable character. The families of Zhong Lian and Lu Ying began to gradually become distant starting from that time marker, since after the incident, the two sides rarely interacted, and the relationship also became increasingly bland. Lu Ying never possessed the intention to repay money, conversely every year still using all sorts of names to borrow money from these relatives. Naturally, Zhong Lian's house did not fall into Lu Ying's trap an additional time. Lu Ying also, because of this recorded hatred against them, frequently releasing bad words behind her family's back. Truly, listening to this, the relationship of Zhong Lian's house was indeed quite messy. At this time, from the interrogation room side, the latest news was transmitted. Ma Su had confessed to the crime. The truth of the event was basically identical to what I had thought. Ma Su had an affair with Lu Ying and was discovered by Zhong Lian. Toward the person who betrayed her, Zhong Lian had no intention to hold on, but the economic debt still had to be calculated clearly. She invited Lu Ying to her home to speak properly. Zhong Lian required Lu Ying to return half the money Ma Su had spent on her. Lu Ying not only didn't want to return money, but also considered Zhong Lian was coming to find trouble, so she let loose provocative words. The two had an argument occur. The two sentences the old lady in room 506 heard surely appeared at that time. Listening to it now, those two sentences were perhaps not uttered by the same person. The sentence, "Since when did you consider us family?" was perhaps shouted by Zhong Lian, while the sentence, "Why do you keep babbling the sentence all day long?" conversely was said by Lu Ying. Only because the voice recognition level of the two was low did the old lady fail to hear that it was two different people talking. At the climax of the argument, Lu Ying lost her rationality, grabbed the fruit paring knife nearby, and murdered Zhong Lian. After discovering Zhong Lian was dead, Lu Ying was panicked, so she called Ma Su via WeChat to plead for help. Ma Su didn't expect Zhong Lian and Lu Ying would secretly meet each other, much less that Lu Ying had killed Zhong Lian, but he still immediately rushed back home, telling Lu Ying to flee first, while himself remaining to handle the corpse for her. Because Lu Ying's clothes were stained with blood after killing Zhong Lian, she changed her clothes out, put on the overcoat jacket inside Zhong Lian's wardrobe, and then put the one-piece dress she wore when arriving into the cloth bag to carry away. Ma Su had also discussed with Lu Ying that if the matter was exposed, he would be the person to stand out to take the blame instead. It was just that during the process of handling the corpse, Ma Su's mental state gradually collapsed. The act of dismembering a body was by no means an easy matter, even if it was merely severing the head. An inexperienced character like Ma Su could not separate a human body with a single knife stroke. Furthermore, when having to face the person he once loved, he truly had no way to be calm to continuously wield the knife toward the corpse. Zhong Lian's dead eyes that wouldn't close were as if accusing his crime. Eventually, he could not endure it anymore, using the weapon to destroy the face of the corpse. After exhausting his strength to sever the head segment, he felt he himself had gone mad. He fell into memories of when he and Zhong Lian first met at an inappropriate timing. In that state, Ma Su unconsciously tied the hair for Zhong Lian. Afterward, he carried the head segment onto the bus, intending to go to the Hujia village area to dispose of the body. He had a friend living in Oshan village, located between Hujia village and Linao village. That friend frequently invited Ma Su to his house to play, and since Ma Su himself liked walking and mountain climbing, the main entertainment activity each time he came to his friend's house was walking around neighboring villages or climbing surrounding mountains. Those walking and climbing experiences caused him to be quite familiar with the stretch of Oshan village, Hujia village, and Linao village, which was the reason why he chose this area to dispose of the body. The matters that occurred after that were precisely the head segment rolling out, and him being pursued and caught by us. But after listening to Ma Su's confession, I kept feeling there were places that were not quite right. In the case analysis room, Lao Feng, the person who participated in the interrogation, also put forward his own view. This fellow Ma Su definitely has something he is hiding from us. I have done interrogation work for so many years. This bit of sharpness is still there. He confessed too cleanly, compared to his previous attitude. The transition is a bit forced. Exactly. I agreed with Lao Feng's words. Furthermore, his confession and the clues we grasp have points of contradiction. Within this, the most crucial problem lies in the fact that Lu Ying and Zhong Lian originally did not interact closely at all. So how did Ma Su have an affair that connected to Lu Ying's place? This doubt is very large. And another thing, if it was indeed Zhong Lian who invited Lu Ying, then why did Zhong Lian have to invite the person to her own home? And even invited her on a working day? Most importantly, if she had invited Lu Ying, why during the daytime did she still go to work normally, and then after working for a bit, temporarily requested leave to go out to meet Lu Ying? Didn't she find it troublesome? Ma Su's confession had no obvious loopholes, but it was not too fitting with common sense. The urgent matter currently remained finding Lu Ying, waiting until we obtained her confession and cross-checked it with Ma Su's confession. We could more or less discover something. 10 o'clock and 5 minutes at night. Lao Huang's side transmitted new news. The body's head segment, 2 knives, along with the phones of Zhong Lian and Ma Su had all been found. However, the pair of hands of the dead person remained with unknown whereabouts. Ma Su was also quite crafty. He himself didn't carry a shovel, and due to the matter being exposed early, he also had no way to borrow a shovel from friends. So the final place he used to hide the head segment turned out to also be an ancient Qing dynasty tomb that tomb raiders had dug out. Fortunately, currently equipment was complete. The police and sniffer dogs going to search were quite numerous. Plus the personnel at the scene had rich experience. So eventually they still successfully found these things. All items of evidence were immediately brought back to the Bureau. Evaluating from the angle of whether a complete chain of evidence could be formed, the head segment and the 2 knives carried the most important meaning. However, to illuminate the case details, the 2 phones were precisely the key. It was just that the condition of the 2 phones was not very good. Ma Su had removed the SIM cards, not knowing where he had tossed them. He had also smashed both phones in one go. Fortunately, the damage to the phones was not too severe. The data inside could still be recovered, and this work didn't consume too much time. Inside the Bureau, an assessment was conducted on the fruit-paring knife and the cleaver found on the mountain. The assessment results could not be available right away, but according to rough preliminary cross-checking, these 2 knives were precisely the weapons. Within this, the fruit-paring knife was the tool used to murder Zhong Lian, while the cleaver was the item used when dismembering the body. Sadly, the fingerprints on the fruit-paring knife had been wiped completely clean, while on the cleaver, there were only the fingerprints of Ma Su alone. We were still lacking evidence that could be used to charge Lu Ying. Around past 1 o'clock in the morning, the data on Ma Su's phone was recovered. His WeChat account became the focus of our concentrated attention. Very quickly after that, we noticed an extremely large problem. Inside Ma Su's WeChat contacts list, there completely was no friend named Lu Ying. We continued to comb through his QQ, DingTalk accounts, and phone contacts list, carefully checking even the photo album, but failed to find any trace indicating the existence of Lu Ying in his life. In addition, what we could confirm further was that Ma Su did not set up a secondary account through these social network softwares. In other words, if only looking for Ma Su's phone, he and Lu Ying had absolutely no intersection in life. I immediately instructed Lao Feng's team to conduct an interrogation of Ma Su once more, requiring him to recall the details when being beside Lu Ying, regardless of whether it was details when the 2 had just met, or details when the 2 established a relationship, or perhaps details when the 2 had an affair. Just let him narrate anything randomly, as long as he narrated it. Ma Su also appeared serious as he recounted a few events, but the content was hollow and didn't fit common sense. Details he should remember, he lacked a single one. Conversely, details that normal people wouldn't care much about, he recounted very richly. Furthermore, whether cross-checked with Ma Su's work schedule or deducted from behavioral logic, these events could not stand. Clearly, the events he recounted were all fabricated by him just now. The matter reaching this stage, we were forced to admit one thing. Ma Su and Lu Ying fundamentally did not know each other at all. His saying he had an affair with Lu Ying was entirely nonsensical chatter. We were nearly led by the nose by him, spinning like a top. However, why did he have to weave such lies? An absurd hypothesis suddenly flashed in my mind. causing us to concentrate attention on Lu Ying, mistakenly thinking she was the culprit or accomplice, was also one of Ma Su's strategies to stretch out time. As long as we continued to investigate according to the wrong direction, all would bring a delaying effect. Then, what was the correct direction? Or to put another way, for whom was he wanting to dispute fleeing time? I took a deep breath. He himself had fallen into the net, no longer needing to stretch out time for himself. The doubt about Lu Ying, though unable to be completely eliminated, when combining available evidence with Ma Su's performance to evaluate, she was perhaps not the person we needed to find. Aside from the two of them, who else was there at the crime scene? The answer was already too clear. Zhong Lian. Yes. Perhaps our judgment was mistaken early on. The clothing on the corpse matched what Zhong Lian wore today, leading to our previous deduction that the dead person carried a high probability of being Zhong Lian. We truly did not hastily put forward a predetermined conclusion, but because police resources were limited, subsequent investigations were always conducted revolving around this high probability option. Yet, sadly, this case perhaps did not fall into that highly probable situation. Relying on clothing to judge someone's identity in the majority of cases is reliable, but if there is a culprit who intentionally alters clothes aiming to mislead public opinion, then this type of judgment will develop a problem. And after determining that Ma Su was deceiving us, the possibility arrayed before our eyes, no matter how bizarre it was, we were forced to accept it. The dead person actually was not Zhong Lian, but Lu Ying. Due to some conflict, Zhong Lian murdered Lu Ying. After discovering the matter had led to consequences that could not be saved, Zhong Lian and Ma Su together plotted to execute a golden cicada shedding its skin, planned by swapping identities with the corpse. First, they destroyed Lu Ying's face, causing us to be unable to recognize the appearance of the corpse. The act of severing both hands of Lu Ying was probably to prevent us from identifying the dead person's identity through fingerprint cross-checking. The majority of citizens had their fingerprint information taken when making the second-generation citizen identity card. So if both hands and thumbs of the corpse still remained, through some specific technical measures, it indeed could determine who the dead person was by cross-checking fingerprints. As for changing the clothes for the dead person, it was entirely to confuse our investigation direction, causing us to believe the dead person was precisely Zhong Lian herself. As for the problem of the hairstyle, that was precisely the oversight of the two of them. There was a possibility, during the process of handling the corpse, because they were too hurried, they did not pay attention to the difference in hairstyle between Lu Ying and Zhong Lian. Of course, what they did was insufficient to deceive the world or completely cause the police side to develop a misconception. After all, even when lacking information about the face and fingerprints, the police could still, through DNA cross-checking, find the true identity of the dead person. But DNA cross-checking needed time, and the item that Ma Su along with his accomplice aimed at was precisely this gap in time. I have a bit of admiration for these two people now. Right from the start, they calculated very far. After killing someone, an ordinary culprit would only think about how to handle the corpse, but they conversely understood that merely handling the corpse was completely insufficient for them to peacefully clear this matter. The cause was very simple. After Lu Ying went missing, sooner or later someone would discover it and report to the police. And merely by checking surveillance cameras, discovering Lu Ying had walked into this hallway, but didn't see her come out, then their home would definitely be blocked. Therefore, parallel to handling the corpse, they prepared two options. On one hand, naturally, they meticulously planned how to dismember and dispose of the body, aiming to conceal their own crime. On the other hand, they also factored in the possibility of the matter being exposed. Hence, after discussing the strategy, Zhong Lian immediately disguised herself as Lu Ying to flee. As for Ma Su, while handling the corpse, he intentionally destroyed or faked the crucial identification characteristics of the body, so that even when discovered by others, at least they could utilize the incorrect judgment of the police regarding the dead person's identity to dispute fleeing time for Zhong Lian. Two coping options aiming at different situations were simultaneously pushed forward right from when the case had just occurred. Of course, if taking the goal of thoroughly deceiving the police, then their plan could be said to be full of loopholes. But if only evaluating the effect of stretching out time, they were very successful. Only, there were a few problems that I still could not think through completely. First, their body disposal behavior seemed a bit too hurried and sketchy. The act of not driving a vehicle away could be understood because, after all, when the police truly investigated, they would definitely prioritize reviewing people departing the residential quarter by private vehicle. So riding the bus to go dispose of the body, at least, would not be easily suspected during the initial phase of the investigation. What I didn't understand was that the risk of riding the bus to go dispose of the body, after all, remained quite large. So why did Ma Su not spend a bit more time wrapping a few more layers around the outside of the corpse head segment? Second, the person highly likely was killed by Zhong Lian, but the body disposal work was mainly completed by Ma Su. Ma Su was willing to do so many tasks for Zhong Lian like that, showing he loved Zhong Lian deeply. That being the case, could Zhong Lian truly be heartless enough to leave Ma Su alone to flee by herself? Third, when we called the mahjong friend of Lu Ying, why did the other party completely fail to point out the person talking on the phone with him was not Lu Ying? The first two problems were very difficult to answer within a short time, but the final problem I could now go verify once more. I personally called that mahjong friend of Lu Ying, wanting to ask for the truth. The phone connected. After verifying identity, I went straight to the point, asking whether he could be certain the person who called him at that time was Lu Ying. Hearing me ask this, the tone of the mahjong friend abruptly became hesitant. Huh? It should be her, right? Officer, actually I am also not very close to her, but the voice listening to it was indeed herself. As for if you want me to guarantee certainly 100%, truly, I don't dare assert. When communicating with her, did she mention any detail indicating she knew who you were? I asked. That matter. The other party thought for a moment. There are 2 points. One is she called me Lao Si, which is the way of calling among the people who frequently play mahjong with us. Second is she knew I opened a factory manufacturing light bulbs. Aside from that, there were no other details. Understood. Thank you for your cooperation. Hanging up, I began to have deductions. In Lu Ying's phone, the name and work of this mahjong friend might have been saved in the notes section, and Zhong Lian, probably thanks to seeing the notes, could accurately impersonate Lu Ying to plead for help. Perhaps the vocal quality of the two did not differ too greatly, added to the fact of using precisely Lu Ying's phone to call. So the probability of Zhong Lian successfully impersonating was not low. To verify this deduction, I again had personnel call Zhong Lian's parents once more, to ask how similar the voices of Lu Ying and Zhong Lian ultimately were. This phone call quickly had results. According to the narrative of Zhong Lian's parents, the voices of the two were truly very similar. Sometimes even family members would mistake them. That being the case, the cause causing the old lady in room 506 and the mahjong friend of Lu Ying to fail to distinguish the voices of the two was considered explained. Now I was forced to admit a matter difficult to voice. The capture measures deployed previously, right from the start, had aimed at the wrong person. Lu Ying originally should not be the target of pursuit. Zhong Lian was precisely the person we truly needed to find. The measures to encircle and capture Zhong Lian were deployed down. Although our reaction was indeed a bit slow, fortunately, right from the start we determined she was swept into this case. Therefore her information had early on been reported by us to the superiors. If she wanted to buy a ticket, rent accommodation, or do any other task requiring an identity card, we could know immediately. This course of action initially was to guard against the true culprit faking her identity information to flee, not expecting it would accidentally play in preventing effect on Zhong Lian's own escape. Of course, if she attempted to exit the country by illegal methods, then relying solely on reporting information was insufficient. Therefore, after clarifying the truth, we supplemented new pursuit measures. Now, combing through surveillance cameras, checking relationship networks, patrolling and lying in ambush at docks or shallows with the possibility of being exploited to cross the border illegally. Each measure was being executed, step by step blocking all her routes to flee abroad. At the same time, Lao Huang transmitted the latest progress of the mountain search work. The missing pair of hands had been found. I breathed a sigh of relief. The case step by step became clearer, and the chain of evidence also gradually closed. The hope of solving the case was right before our eyes. Yet a few minutes later, a new piece of intelligence transmitted back from the front line conversely caused me to completely freeze. A scout team investigating the traces of Lu Ying in the area around the Xingfu Kuliuan quarter responded with an important piece of information. Inside the surveillance camera of a fruit store near the residential quarter, they found the silhouette of Lu Ying. Lu Ying did not enter the store, but only walked past the store door. However, precisely within those few short seconds, the camera captured her full frontal face. And the time of this image was 11 o'clock and 38 minutes in the middle of the day yesterday. After knowing this news, my mind was as tangled as a mess of hemp ropes. Damn it, it was ruined again. Previously, we asserted the red-dressed woman departing the hallway was Lu Ying, mainly based on two reasons. One was, although this person intentionally shielded her full frontal face from analyzing the meager images that nearby surveillance cameras captured, her height, physique, gait characteristics, as well as the partial face image captured all matched at a high level with the relevant traits of Lu Ying. Second was, that red-dressed woman went out without coming in, which meant she necessarily had entered inside the hallway under a different clothing form and dressing style. Through field investigation, the possibility of her being another resident in the building was eliminated, and at that time we defaulted Zhong Lian was the dead person. Therefore, according to the elimination method, she could only be Lu Ying. But after discovering the dead person possessed the possibility of being Lu Ying, while Zhong Lian was precisely the fugitive, we naturally put forward new hypotheses toward the images on the surveillance cameras. The similarity in height, physique, gait, and facial characteristics could be due to Zhong Lian having intentionally mimicked them. The images captured originally were very fragmented, added to the short duration and blurred images. So using mimicry to deceive the police was not any excessively difficult matter. And because we assumed that Zhong Lian intended to mislead, the clothes when entering and going out not being identical was also not any matter difficult to explain. But the reason we kept guessing back and forth like this was based on a premise. At that time, no surveillance camera captured completely the face of the red-dressed woman. Precisely due to this point, we cannot determine her identity accurately, only able to rely on deductions. Yet now it was different. This newly found surveillance image explicitly pointed to an extremely clear fact. The red-dressed woman departing the hallway after the case occurred was not Zhong Lian, but precisely Lu Ying. We were mistaken again, but fortunately, this error this time did not cause any consequence difficult to save. Originally, those measures to prevent Lu Ying from before had still not been dismantled, added to the fact of currently having found new images about Lu Ying's movements from surveillance cameras. So wanting to subdue her was also not any excessively difficult matter. Regarding Lu Ying's direction after passing by the fruit store, after analyzing and judging, we did not develop excessively large disagreement. She surely had returned home to pack up some belongings to facilitate hiding. It was just that inside the Xingfu Kuliuan quarter, cameras were not numerous, added to the fact of Lu Ying having lived here for years, so she was very familiar with the quarter situation, which was why we could not find traces of her from the street surveillance system. But the coverage rate of surveillance cameras in Yinhai City was extremely high. Even if inside the quarter she wasn't captured, she cannot possess the capacity to evade all other cameras in the inner city. I firmly believed new clues would soon be discovered. Currently, because we determined Lu Ying once returned to the quarter, the reviewing scope could be narrowed an additional step. Taking the Xingfu Kuliuan quarter as the center, we mapped out a critical region and would conduct a careful review of this area. Numerous scout teams were mobilized, coordinating with the police force of the local police station to review every single social security camera in this region. Within a few hours after the case occurred, ride-hailing cars and taxis entering and exiting the quarter or taking this quarter as a starting point, as well as bus routes stopping at stations nearby, all became objects of our tracking. In addition, right from the first time determining Lu Ying was involved in a case, we deployed AI analysis toward the security surveillance and traffic surveillance systems of the entire city. It was just that the analysis up to now still had no results. Estimated to be that after Lu Ying returned home, she executed a simple disguise like changing clothes and wearing a mask, so AI found it very difficult to trace. Although AI possessed the specific capacity to flag people wearing masks, Recently, the flu epidemic was breaking out strongly and many people going out wore masks. So even if it could find all people wearing masks, the manual reviewing workload after that was extremely horrifying. The Corps currently was finding out after packing belongings and leaving the Xingfu Kuiliyuan quarter how Luing ultimately had dressed. Quite sadly, right now it was the middle of the night, and waking up all store owners in this region for us to extract surveillance was not very realistic. That segment of surveillance at the fruit store just now was due to the scout team dispatched copying it before the store closed, and was viewed on the device of the local police station. There were still a few segments of surveillance like that not viewed completely, but their scope basically was limited inside the Xingfu Kuiliyuan quarter and the roads wrapping around the outside. As for social security cameras on a wider scope, we still had not grasped them. Before long, the remaining segments of surveillance cameras were checked completely. The camera of a sweater tailoring store, not far from the fruit store, also recorded traces of Lu Ying at 11 o'clock and 41 minutes. But looking at the time and direction, clearly that was the image when she was on her way home. Among all segments of cameras, the silhouette when she left was not found. This is not right. A veteran comrade with experience spoke. The camera coverage inside the Xingfu Kuiliyuan quarter is indeed low, but the camera density in the loop surrounding it is very high. If Lu Ying left the quarter, she could in no way completely avoid being captured. Therefore, the event has only three possibilities. One is she fundamentally has not left the quarter. Second is we have missed checking a camera. Third is she left by automobile. Another policeman analyzed. The possibility of her not having left the quarter is not large, but cannot be eliminated. The monitoring of the Xingfu Kuiliyuan quarter cannot be slighted. Even if currently she hasn't gone, she will surely find an opportunity to leave here to avoid the edge of the storm, I said. However, personally, I consider we still should concentrate major energy on the latter two possibilities. Cameras need to be checked an additional time, within which cameras at quarter entrances and exits and crucial traffic intersections around must be extracted back to transcode, enter into the system, and use the facial characteristics of Lu Ying we grasp to let AI conduct cross-checking of suspicious faces. As for the hypothesis of leaving by automobile, according to the clues we grasp currently, Lu Ying herself has no car, and a few people we know have a fairly close relationship with her and have a private car did not approach her quarter yesterday at all. Ride-hailing cars, taxis, buses are all being reviewed. If there are clues, they will feed back here immediately. Of course, let's not harbor a luck-seeking mentality that doing so will definitely drag the person out. Her relationship network we grasp is not comprehensive. If inside the quarter there was someone willing to drive a vehicle to take her away, then what we are doing at this moment remains far from enough to determine her direction. Therefore, we also need to execute a manual review towards surveillance cameras on the main roads, near the quarter after the time marker 11 o'clock and 41 minutes in the middle of the day yesterday. On one hand, to see if AI missed anything when searching. On the other hand, if she sat in the back seat or angles that the camera didn't capture, AI definitely could also not recognize the face. Therefore, we must review every single vehicle of people like neighbors possessing a fairly close relationship with her. If there is a car departing after she returned to the quarter, check carefully through the camera to see if that car has anything suspicious. The direction of subsequent action was decided like that. After discussing the specific plan, everyone began to act. The turning point quickly appeared. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the people of our sub-bureau and the subordinate police station carried Lu Ying's photo, knocking on every single door to ask whether anyone paid attention to her direction yesterday. We didn't expect that through this method. Before long we harvested a new clue. An old grandfather in the quarter asserted he had seen Lu Ying at noon yesterday. He said at that time, he saw Lu Ying board a bread car van. This information was extremely pivotal. Although the old grandfather did not remember the license plate, he described the color and brand of the vehicle. We immediately threw the quarter's surveillance cameras locked onto the target vehicle. The vehicle owner was found immediately. After hearing our purpose of coming, he was a bit panicked, quickly admitting he had helped carry Lu Ying for a stretch, but firmly asserted he himself did not know Lu Ying had committed a crime. According to the owner's words, he opened a grain and oil store nearby, and that day, he came to the Xingfu Kuiliyuan quarter to deliver goods to a customer. he didn't expect after delivering the goods, he met Luing. The owner and Luing met each other 1 year ago at a financial club nearby. At that time, the two were only casual social acquaintances, not counted as close. Initially, he also earned a bit of money from a project in that club, but later that so-called club fled, causing several tens of thousands of yuan of principal money he poured in to lose completely. What the owner didn't expect was that after Luing heard this matter, she actively sent him a red envelope of 2,000 yuan. Luing said she herself had earned money from the project, and since her teammates lost heavily like that, she alone enjoying profits was a matter that could not be accepted, which was why she decided to use her own pocket money to compensate a part of the loss for him. This matter caused the owner to be very touched, although eventually he couldn't bear to accept that money. After that, the relationship of the two became closer a bit, frequently chatting a few sentences on WeChat. Because they were already acquainted from before, when meeting and hearing Luing put forward the request to help carry her for a stretch, he agreed right away without thinking much. Initially, he intended to let Luing sit in the passenger seat, but Luing said she suffered from car sickness and earnestly requested to sit in the back of the vehicle where goods were stacked. At that time, the owner completely didn't know Luing had committed a crime, naturally also not connecting her doing so was to evade surveillance cameras. So he agreed. After the owner finished explaining, we also understood the majority of the event. No wonder surveillance cameras didn't find traces of Luing, nor discovered traces of her sitting in ride-hailing cars, taxis, or buses. It turned out she left the quarter in this manner. Some social relationships that were not very close were very difficult to review, such as the relationship between Luing and this food store owner. We didn't trace it. Naturally, also wouldn't pay attention to this van. The owner stated Luing got off the vehicle ahead of a cement factory on Liuzhong Street. He himself had no intention to go there, but Luing requested it, which is why he specifically carried her over. We immediately rushed to set out for her drop-off point. The Liuzhong Street area could already be considered a suburb, and the coverage of security and traffic surveillance was limited. However, fortunately, Luing got off the vehicle on a main access road, and along this access road there were not a few surveillance cameras belonging to factories and stores. Now, when the search scope was clarified, the rate of checking cameras yielding results increased significantly. Based on these camera clips, we locked onto her movements. After getting off the vehicle, initially she walked a short stretch along the main road. When reaching a river, she turned sharply to follow the small path by the river and then entered an adjacent village. Our police force entered the village, carrying Lu Ying's photo to knock on every single door to inquire whether anyone had seen her. We didn't expect that the progress this time was extremely smooth. Just as we knocked on the third household, we obtained an extremely important clue. Luing currently was still staying inside the village. Only a few minutes later, under the guidance of an enthusiastic citizen, we found Luing inside a rented room. Eventually, she also fell into the net. In the interrogation room, I once more sat opposite Ma Su. He looked at me, his expression appearing extraordinarily calm, but I could recognize he was anxious. After a long time, I slowly opened my mouth. Luing is caught. Ma Su's whole body stiffened for a beat, and afterward appeared unconcerned as he said, "Officer, don't trick me anymore. What needed to be confessed, I have confessed completely. If you guys don't believe it, I also have no other way." I did not explain much, only calmly supplemented. "If you don't believe it, I can call her over to directly confront you." This sentence having just been uttered, Ma Su again exposed a look of panic for a flash. But very quickly after that, he concealed that panic, shaking his head. "If you guys truly found her, just go ahead and ask her. Whether she speaks or I speak, is there any difference?" I sighed, looking straight into Ma Su's eyes. "There is a difference. Don't tell me you think we haven't asked her? Ma Su, there's not much time left. I want to give you an additional opportunity. I know you have a person you want to protect. But face reality, Ma Su. Don't continue to deceive yourself and others. You are intelligent enough. I know you understand everything. It should end. It's time to demand justice for her." After finishing these words, I said nothing more, only quietly looked at him. Initially, Ma Su still looked at me with that unconcerned gaze. Seemingly, not wanting to admit anything. But after a few minutes of standoff, the fake calm he painfully maintained eventually gradually shattered, replaced instead by complex emotions woven between helplessness, anger, and self-blame. 2 streams of tears welled out from the corners of his eyes. His throat moved, seemingly wanting to say something, but persistently failed to utter words. I patiently waited. There was no need to say anything further. I knew he would say the truth. Even if he didn't speak, it didn't matter to me, because Lu Ying had confessed everything already. I only wanted Ma Su to personally confirm that answer. I believed he would speak. He was not stupid. Whether I was tricking him, he himself was the person clearest on it. Time slowly passed. 10 odd minutes later, Ma Su eventually opened his mouth hoarsely. "Officer, I'll speak. I'll speak everything I know to you." Around 9 o'clock and 50 minutes yesterday morning, Ma Su received a phone call via WeChat. The person calling him was his wife, Zhong Lian. On the phone, Zhong Lian appeared very agitated, but still coherently recounted to Ma Su what had occurred. That maternal older cousin of hers, Lu Ying, had sought the door again. Toward this person named Lu Ying, Ma Su's impression could be said to be incredibly deep, right from when he and Zhong Lian were still in the matchmaking phase. Zhong Lian had once told him about this bizarre relative named Lu Ying. Of course, at that time, Lu Ying had early on severed contact with Zhong Lian's family, the two sides having no relation, so Ma Su also only treated those matters as random rumors to listen to, not paying attention to Lu Ying at all. But by the 2nd year after the two married, Lu Ying again began to frequently seek them, occasionally pretending to ask after them warmly. The cause she sought the couple remained the old, stale trick, coaxing the two to give her money to go invest. Naturally, she did not succeed. Zhong Lian never granted Lu Ying a good face. Ma Su also followed Zhong Lian's intent, turning down all of Lu Ying's requests. But after all, the other party was his wife's cousin. Out of politeness, Ma Su usually spoke words of refusal a bit more courteously. Nonetheless, Lu Ying didn't care about those things at all. She still thick-skinnedly occasionally came to disturb the two, finding all sorts of excuses to demand money. This time, when receiving the call from Zhong Lian, Ma Su assumed it was still like every regular time, only needing to cope simply with a rogue Lu Ying. But when he returned home and pushed the room door open, everything was completely outside his calculations. The living room was full of bloodstains. A corpse lay blocking right in the absolute center, while Zhong Lian was sitting flat beside the body, covering her face and sobbing loudly. That absolute moment, his brain was as if it stopped operating. He didn't know why the matter had become like this. He only knew the matter had been made large. Seeing him return, Zhong Lian stood up and rushed into his arms, constantly sobbing. "Ah Su, I..." She tremblingly pointed her finger toward the corpse on the ground, but for a long time failed to utter words. The pungent, thick smell of blood on Zhong Lian's body caused Ma Su to eventually calm down. He immediately gently patted Zhong Lian's shoulder to soothe her emotions. From Zhong Lian's mouth, Ma Su learned the course of the event. Lu Ying, after knowing she cannot capture any benefits from their family, eventually gave up the intent to demand they give money. However, she conversely aimed at an additional resource belonging to Zhong Lian that was precisely her status as a primary school teacher. Therefore, that morning, Lu Ying called Zhong Lian, inviting her to meet and talk. Initially, Zhong Lian refused to meet, but Lu Ying conversely took Zhong Lian's career out to threaten her. She said if Zhong Lian refused to meet her, she would come to the school gate and go online to release rumors about Zhong Lian's private life, causing everyone to doubt her moral character as a teacher. The character of Zhong Lian herself had no issues at all, but the sentence, "a stray torso fears no tilted shadow," could never be completely applied to actual society. The parents who refused to investigate and verify, but blindly believed in rumors, were not a small number. As long as this group of people caused trouble, even if the school knew Zhong Lian did nothing wrong, they were not certain to be willing to stand out to protect her. Therefore, Lu Ying's threat took effect. Zhong Lian was forced to agree to meet Lu Ying. To avoid being seen by others, Zhong Lian invited the meeting location right at her own home. At 9 o'clock and 46 minutes in the morning, Lu Ying reached Zhong Lian's home. She went straight to the point, putting forward her request. forcing Zhong Lian to use her status as a teacher to help Luing market to the class parents an investment project named Light Elite Nurturing Plan. This project claimed to be constructed by the cooperation of multiple top universities in Australia. As long as parents invested several tens of thousands or several hundreds of thousands of yuan into it, students, when transferring levels from primary school to middle school or testing into high school, would have their admission scores reduced by targeted admissions classes, established by these universities cooperating with middle and high schools in the country, and eventually be exempted from testing into relevant universities. The project also promoted that the invested money could be used directly to deduct interview fees, tuition, and other types of expenses. The segment of money not used completely would be refunded entirely, accompanied by high interest. Zhong Lian, having just heard about this project's method of speaking, immediately knew it was a scam. She flatly refused Lu Ying's request. Lu Ying refused to give up, still continuing to use releasing rumors to apply pressure on Zhong Lian. But this time, Zhong Lian no longer tolerated her tricks. She cruelly required Lu Ying to leave her home immediately. Lu Ying refused to leave, and the two then had an argument occur. The longer they argued, the selfishness, viciousness, and acrimony of Lu Ying eventually enraged Zhong Lian. Overcome by a fit of rage, Zhong Lian lost her rationality, unable to restrain herself as she casually grabbed the fruit-paring knife beside her and stabbed toward Lu Ying. This stab caused the matter to completely lose control. After being stabbed, Lu Ying, due to losing too much blood, died rapidly. And Zhong Lian didn't expect the matter would progress to this extent, standing stunned to one side full of panic. A few minutes later, she collected her wits. She herself still had so many tasks she wanted to do, but hadn't executed. She cannot, and was also unwilling for a type of dregs like this to have to bear criminal responsibility. Very quickly after that, Zhong Lian made up her mind. She had to hide. She absolutely could not let the police catch her. However, a living person dying right inside one's home was something that couldn't be hidden for long. Whether it was Lu Ying's relatives or friends discovering something abnormal and reporting the case, or neighbors around smelling something from the corpse and going to report to the police, all could cause this murder to be exposed. Therefore, she had to handle the corpse. But the act of body disposal was also full of risk. If done poorly, conversely, it would cause the police to find the body even more quickly. Thus, she thought back and forth, eventually thinking of a coping strategy. She intended to find a way to cause the police to mistake the identity of the corpse, mistakenly thinking the dead person was precisely herself, while the culprit was Lu Ying. The police were not fools. This mistake could not be maintained for too long, but as long as it could dispute enough time for herself to flee, it was enough. Right away, she searched out a set of her own clothes and dressed the corpse of Lu Ying in them, and then stuffed the outfit she had just changed out of into the cloth bag Lu Ying brought along. Afterward, she held the fruit-paring knife up, tremblingly slashing the face of Lu Ying completely to pieces. Finishing these tasks, she collapsed to the ground due to exhaustion. Within those few minutes, she had thought about very many things. 1 hour ago, she was still a primary school teacher. Work though tiring, but life still had prospects. But now, everything could not return anymore. Why had the matter become like this? She thought but couldn't understand. Zhong Lian's emotions gradually shattered, tears unable to restrain as they welled out. Previous times coming to the house helped Lu Ying no ma. Su was a person suffering from severe face blindness, prosopagnosia, and her entire strategy was deployed revolving around this weak point. A patient suffering from face blindness could rely on which aspects to identify another's identity: scent, hairstyle, clothing, accessories, face shape, voice, or meeting context. All could be keys to identifying identity. Regarding scent, this was the item easiest to resolve. Zhong Lian had bled too much. Borrowing this thick, pungent smell of blood could easily cause Ma Su to be unable to distinguish the two via olfaction. Regarding hairstyle, Lu Ying first let loose her own hair to let the hairstyle hang down naturally identical to Zhong Lian. Afterward, she tied Zhong Lian's hair into a ponytail hairstyle. In reality, that day Lu Ying had her hair in a garlic bulb bun. Her tying a ponytail for Zhong Lian was because during the previous time meeting Ma Su, Lu Ying's hairstyle was a ponytail. She wanted through this to deeply engrave the perception. The dead person is Lu Ying into Ma Su's mind. Regarding clothing, this task was even simpler. Lu Ying directly took a set of clothes from inside Zhong Lian's wardrobe to wear, while her own outfit was stuffed into the cloth bag. She wasn't certain whether Ma Su knew what Zhong Lian wore today, but she could only do it this way. After all, stripping the clothes off Zhong Lian's body to wear on herself would consume too much time. If in the middle of doing it she was discovered, the problem would be very large. Instead of that, it was more convenient to find an excuse to trick Ma Su. Regarding accessories, Zhong Lian wore no glasses or earrings, so Lu Ying removed her own earrings. Thus, the disguise regarding accessories was completed. Regarding facial characteristics, Ma Su after all could not distinguish them, but Lu Ying still disputed time to slash Zhong Lian's face to pieces. Like that, at least it could cause the police to consume more time in identifying the dead person's identity, helping herself be locked onto later. The voice was the easiest thing because Lu Ying's voice originally was very similar to Zhong Lian. Finally was the context problem. Ma Su knew Lu Ying sought the door, which was why he returned. So seeing Zhong Lian or seeing Lu Ying both fell within the scope of his expectations. Lu Ying understood that she herself had to act truly fittingly to be able to guide Ma Su to believe she was his wife, Zhong Lian, and smoothly convince Ma Su to treat Zhong Lian's corpse as Lu Ying. From the results displayed, she had done it. She successfully misled Ma Su, causing him to think she was his wife, Zhong Lian, and smoothly persuaded Ma Su to deal with Zhong Lian's corpse as Lu Ying. Thus, this continuous chain of plans began to take effect. Zhong Lian was dead, but Ma Su conversely thought the dead person was Lu Ying. However, to deceive the police and help his wife, Zhong Lian escaped the crime. He dealt with the dead person as Zhong Lian. The most ideal situation was Ma Su lying that he himself killed Zhong Lian, and the police failed to trace any loopholes. The probability of this situation was very large. From Ma Su's perspective, if he didn't admit to the killing himself, or didn't say the dead person was Zhong Lian, the police would possess the possibility of tracing a third person's involvement in the case, from which they could very likely discover the true culprit was another person. Only by bearing all crime details himself, saying he himself killed his wife, could Lu Ying be treated as Zhong Lian, helping Zhong Lian be able to continue surviving. And from the police's perspective, the dead person was indeed Zhong Lian, and Ma Su had also confessed to the crime of murdering Zhong Lian. The case looked to have nothing suspicious, and naturally it was very likely to treat that as the truth. If it was like that, Lu Ying only needed to go abroad to take refuge for a period of time to be able to live freely outside the law. After a period when the case concluded, she could even return to the country and live a normal life. A slightly worse situation was the police investigating and discovering the existence of a third person. As long as the police were aware there was a third person, then before long, Lu Ying herself would be locked onto as the culprit. But even like that, relying on those misleading measures, the time delayed was enough for her to flee very far. Lu Ying had calculated very carefully. Sadly, eventually, she still fell into the net. The cause of Lu Ying falling into the net, speaking of it, was also full of drama. She originally had contacted a network friend. The other party declared that as long as money changed hands, within 12 hours they could arrange the exit itinerary, guaranteeing she reached Indonesia safely and without incident. Lu Ying, because of this, transferred money to the other party, and at the same time found a rented room on Liuzhong Street to temporarily stay, waiting for the other party to direct subsequent action, due to her believing in the other party's promise of "we'll soon take you away." When on Liuzhong Street, she did not expend too much mental effort to conceal her tracks. But that fellow, after receiving the money, repeatedly delayed, persistently failing to put forward any substantial support for her. By the time she realized the other party was highly likely merely defrauding her money, it was already too late. The police following the traces had found the absolute door. She eventually could not escape the net of the law. In the interrogation room, Ma Su cried without forming words. "Actually, you had early on suspected Lu Ying, right?" I said. "You understand Zhong Lian. You know what kind of person she was. She would not because of a minute of rage kill a person. much less, after killing, want to evade responsibility. Furthermore, stepping back to speak, even if she wanted to flee, she absolutely cannot think of a way to leave you behind, forcing you to bear the crime instead like this. Whether it was the neighbors of the two or Zhonglian's parents, all mentioned that the affection of the couple was very good. A couple loving each other like that would in no way perform an act to let the other party bear the crime instead. Ma Su did not respond to my words, still immersed in ultimate suffering, unable to escape. After a long time, so long that I had no hope of hearing any explanation from his mouth anymore, he then spoke hoarsely, his voice very light but full of regret. Suspected? How could I not suspect? But after she left, I then noticed there was something not right. At that time, I already had no way to verify truth or falsehood. Report to the police to denounce her? But what if that person truly was my wife and not Luing? I didn't dare gamble. Winning the gamble, Yen also could not come back to life. But if losing the gamble, it was precisely my own hands that pushed her into a dead end. I had no other choice. I could only walk this path to the end. Even if there's only a single flimsiest sliver of possibility, I also had to let Yen escape out. But eventually I still lost the gamble. Ma Su bowed his head deeply, saying no further words. I didn't know what should be said at this time. Yes, the truth was indeed like this. In that situation, besides gambling around, what else could Ma Su do? He had no other choice. He could only assume the person fleeing was Zhonglian, and then go clear the road for her. However, reality in the final analysis would not, because of his inner mind, have any alteration. He had early on permanently lost the person he loved most. Even before he put forward any decision, this matter was already a fixed outcome. The speed of solving the case was rapid enough, and also no one else was harmed by the culprit after the case occurred. So Chief Hu and the city leaders were still fairly satisfied. Along with the notification warning about the true culprit falling into the net being published, the storm of public opinion was also gradually settling down. The troubles that this case brought to us were considered thoroughly resolved, but I felt, in my whole life, I would never forget this case. Utilizing his love, utilizing his disease, to perform an act that could kill his core most. It was truly absurd enough, thrilling enough, and also enough to cause a person to sigh and feel sorrow. Thank you everyone for listening to the end of today's story by Pineapple. I wish you all a truly joyful and happy day. I hope everyone will support Pineapple in the upcoming story series.